Welcome to the North State Breakdown with Benjamin Nguyen. Today, I'd like to discuss Reading City Council member Tenessa Audette and her investigation into Reading's city budget and the debate it sparked across the community. Back in August, Audette released a 154-page document titled Reading Budget Findings. She said the numbers in the city financial reports simply didn't add up. Her claim was that revenues were being overstated, reserves were quietly slipping below policy levels, and one-time federal relief money was being used to hide ongoing costs. In her own words,
how we got here, it basically started in March of this year during a budget workshop. I thought I understood where our finances stood, but I was wrong. And the city manager shifted the narrative, and I started to ask questions, a lot of questions, like actual numbers for the last 18 months, which I couldn't find anywhere. And basically, I got shut down.
That statement set off weeks of arguments, from City Hall to social media.
Reading City Council member Tenessa Audette has spent literally months going over the last several years of city budgets, and she says the numbers just don't add up.
The dining room of her home, every square inch of the counter and a table, along with much of the wall, is covered with paperwork and graphs. She called in retired City Finance Director Denise Maxwell to check her work. Among their concerns, reserves are not healthy, there's a lack of transparency, and money from the proposed 1% sales tax initiative would be used to fill budget gaps and not for the intended purpose.
City officials pushed back hard, saying the budget was sound and fully compliant with the city's 10% reserve rule.
Yeah, city reserves are very healthy. I think if you look at our standards, right, before 2019, it was a 5% reserve requirement. Today, we have a 10%. So in modern times, we're more healthy than we've ever been. Now, we are lower than we were a couple years ago, but that was by design and by plan. So our reserves are very healthy at 10%.
After 2 months of growing tensions, the council called a special meeting on October 22nd, 2025, a meeting meant to address Audette's claims once and for all. What happened in that room and the arguments that followed reveal how complicated the truth can be when politics and numbers meet. Financial Director Greg Robinette took the podium first. His message was calm, but firm.
I thought this quote was powerful from Council Policy 412, which I believe to be a great council policy, is the budget decisions today will have an impact on the city's future, and not only what is accomplished, but what resources are available in the future. It is important to know what the 10-year plan is not. The 10-year plan is not amended for the actual results of revenue and expenses, and it is not amended for total amended, including carryovers and other items allowed by council policy, such as rolling stock, the equipment replacement fund, and carryovers, as I mentioned.
Then he walked the council through the slides that answered Tenessa Audette's biggest claims one by one. It was less of a clash of personalities and more of a contest over what the numbers really meant. Number 1, council was kept in the dark. Audette said the city's financial information came in too late and filtered.
I really have realized that I can no longer accept the city manager's narrative at face value. Council doesn't even see agenda items most of the time until the Thursday night before the Tuesday meeting. That gives us just 5 days to read hundreds of pages, meet with staff, answer constituents, and prepare to vote.
Robinette countered.
We update the 10-year plan, and that happens, budget actuals happen 4 times a year for a total of 8 over the course of the 2-year budget cycle, and the 10-year plan is typically updated 2 times a year or 4 times over the course of the budget cycle. Finally, we move into our annual audit process and the preparation of our annual comprehensive financial report, or ACFR. This is basically our final audited financial information. It uses different bases of accounting depending on what page you're on in the book. And it's a very complex process, and I always thank the finance team for their hard work on that process.
2, reserves fell below policy. In her Reading budget findings, Audette wrote that actual cash reserves had dipped to 7.2%, well below the required 10%. She said this violated council policy and wasn't disclosed before the budget was adopted.
So when it comes to this year's budget, I believe that our ending cash balance is going to be $7.9 million, which they told us it was going to be. And they're saying our start is going to be 9. Well, those should be the same number. So that starts us off a lot lower than what we thought as far as what's in our savings account.
Robinette reported that the short-term swings are normal. By fiscal year end, reserves recover above the 10% target.
So first, the 10-year plan does begin below 10%. And through surpluses or a balanced budget in FY26 and FY27, the cash will be rebuilt above the 10%. But importantly, when people speak of a balanced budget in common vernacular, they mean revenues relative to expenses.
He noted that the third quarter report showing a dip was released later only because the staff turnover and the compressed budget schedule. But that explanation did little to quiet those who felt misled. 3. Raises in staffing drained the budget. Audette's report detailed a 35% rise in payroll costs since 2020, blaming market rate raises and new hires. She warned that the city locked in long-term obligations on short-term revenue.
The city gave across-the-board raises to every bargaining unit and executive staff. And they weren't small adjustments. They averaged 20%. Many raises were 30% and 40%. And the overall personnel costs all the way across the board rose by 35% between 2020 and 2024.
It's worth remembering how we got here. In September of 2023, the Reading City Council approved a round of executive pay adjustments. During that meeting, Councilmember Tenessa Audette spoke in favor of the raises.
These are the hard decisions that leaders make, is that when we have these issues, when we're approving raises, that at some point it's going to reach the top, and we have to make those hard decisions to keep the people in place that we want.
The measure passed, with only one council member voting no. Audette's reasoning then, that paying competitive wages help retain qualified employees, is the same argument city staff use today to defend those very decisions. Robinette emphasized that many of the new positions were funded by utility fees or grants, not by the general fund.
Expenditures, the charts on page 70 and 71, it's important to point out they include the general grants fund. This is another opportunity in future budget cycles. We'll likely have a separate chart so that this is very clear which funds or which items are part of the general fund grants. And then so that it's very clear why they're not included in the 10-year plan.
Still, residents watching saw the bigger picture: more administrators, fewer patrol officers. That disconnect fueled online debates for weeks. Number 4, ARPA funds covered structural gaps. Audette accused the city of using federal COVID relief dollars to prop up ongoing payroll, creating what she called a temporary fix with permanent costs.
And to make room for all those raises, police and fire positions were pushed onto temporary grants like ARPA and SAFER, leaving those jobs unsustainable once the money that came from the outside grants ran out.
The city's October report backed him up, showing every ARPA dollar audited with no findings. But the optics were tough. Grant-funded police and firefighter jobs disappearing just as public concern about safety was rising. Number 5, inflated revenue forecasts. Audette traced the city's trouble back to 2022, when the staff increased 10-year sales tax projections mid-cycle.
Inflated revenues created the illusion of new money, and that illusion was used to justify permanent raises citywide, commitments based on projections that never came true.
Forecasts were based on 2 years of real growth. In other words, staff said the forecasts looked reasonable until the economy cooled in 2023.
And some of the challenges in this process is revenues can be unpredictable. We've seen that particularly over the past probably 3 or 4 years with sales tax. And then, of course, there's always potential unknown expenditure pressures that could be lurking around the corner, especially when you're adopting a biennial budget that could happen due to inflation, union agreements, or additional service demands.
To Audette's supporters, that sounded like excuse-making. To others, it was simply how long-range budgeting works. As the meeting stretched into the evening, emotion stayed mostly restrained, but the divide was clear. Some residents applauded Audette for demanding answers. By the end of the night, both sides claimed victory. Audette had forced the city to answer tough questions. City officials had publicly defended their integrity. But neither side had convinced the other. And hanging over all of it was one unresolved question: how to pay for what comes next. Before we talk about that, let's check whether accountability is applied the same way when it isn't convenient. On April 9th, 2024, Planning Commissioner Aaron Hatch said this from the dais.
And I just feel like that it's hard for me to see a way that it doesn't feel like staff was trying to kind of design a specific outcome by using, avoid legal risks by having any of us planning commissioners speak.
A month later, Councilmember Tenessa Audette put an item on the City Council agenda to address Hatch's comments.
This item is mine to put forward, so I'll be talking about it. There won't be a staff report, it'll be me, but doing what I'm doing out of the duty and responsibility that I feel that I have. For the last 17 months, I have been the liaison to the Planning Commission. And
She also argued that staff had been pulled into an unusual amount of back and forth with Hatch.
in September, there were group meetings with commissioners to talk about things, but with Aaron Hatch, there was a one-on-one meeting with staff to talk about his specific repeated concerns and all the amendments and changes that he had asked for. And they were happy to do it. They wanted to accommodate him, they wanted to work with him, they wanted to make it work.
She then characterized Hatch's April 9th statement as an accusation of corruption from the chair and asked the council to respond.
And then on the 9th, instead of talking to all of them, after 14 months of working together with the staff and them accommodating him and changing things and compromising and explaining and working with Commissioner Hatch, every step of the way, he took this opportunity from the dais to publicly state that generally he assumes positive intent, but this time he feels that staff was trying to design a specific outcome. Given you have a planning commissioner as the chair from the dais accusing staff of politely accusing them of doing something that's underhanded, corrupt, whatever word that you want to use.
Here's why this matters to today's budget fight. Audette now says she's being admonished for asking tough questions. But when a commissioner asked tough questions about process, she brought a council item to admonish him, calling it a line-crossing accusation, flagging staff burden, and seeking a formal response. It appears like a double standard on scrutiny for who gets to do it. The debate over Reading's budget didn't end in the council chambers. It shifted to a bigger question: how the city will pay for public safety, roads, and parks in the years ahead. That question now has a name: the 1-cent sales tax initiative. The citizen-sponsored measure would add 1% to every taxable sale in the city. It's a special tax, which means the money is legally locked into certain uses. 30% for roads and transportation, 13% for fire services, 12% each for the Reading Police Department and the Shasta County Sheriff's Office jail agreement, 9% for city parks, 9% for northern riverfront facilities like the Civic Auditorium and the rodeo grounds, 5% for the Reading Regional Airport, and 10% discretionary for the council's budget process. Those percentages can't be changed without another public vote for the first 5 years. After that, any shifts inside a category require a 4/5 council vote. The ordinance also creates a citizens advisory committee and requires annual independent audits made public at open meetings. But Tenessa Audette warned that the tax might become a backdoor fix for mismanaged finances.
So when this new solution of a sales tax come, my concern is that it's not going to give the people all of these amazing amenities. It's really just going to plug a very deep hole that we have dug ourselves into.
Her argument is simple. If the city inflated revenue projections and drained reserves, voters shouldn't reward that behavior with a permanent tax increase. She wants structural reform before revenue. City officials pushed back just as firmly. Finance Director Greg Robinette and City Manager Barry Tippin both said that the initiative can't be used to fill general fund gaps.
The sales tax, if it passes, has very specific categories it has to be spent on. Not to do so would be against the law.
To supporters like Councilmember Mike Latal, the measure is less about patching the past and more about protecting the future. At the end of all of this, the report, the rebuttal, the special meeting, And now, this ballot measure. One thing is clear. Reading's argument isn't just about money. It's about trust. Tenessa Audette has spent months saying that public deserves honesty first and taxes later. Her supporters see her as a watchdog who finally asked the hard questions about a budget they were told was balanced. City leaders insist those questions were answered in public workshops, audited reports, and a decade of clean financial awards. To them, this entire dispute shows how easily perception can eclipse process. Both stories have power. Audette's story warns that short-term optimism and hidden assumptions can erode public confidence. The city story reminds voters that responsible management sometimes looks like dull consistency. Workshops, spreadsheets, and forecasts no one reads until there's a controversy. Now the 1 cent tax has become the test. A yes vote would give the city a dedicated stream for roads, safety, parks, locked behind legal restrictions and citizen audits. A no vote would force City Hall to keep cutting and stretching what's left. Either way, the decision will say less about the numbers and more about how much faith Reading has in the people adding them up. And that's the breakdown.